You're facing 2 counts of premeditated murder, and the court does find probable cause. You'll be held no bond.
The story of YNW Melly is a dark one, and it's one that has been going on for years, and not in a good way. Because years back he was arrested for the murder of his music mates, but because of COVID and various other delays, his trial and sentencing hasn't happened yet. Most people agree that he's guilty based on the evidence provided against him by the prosecution. And now the question is that of how he'll be punished. That too has been dragged out in the process, and it's taken many twists and turns. But now a recent ruling might put the death penalty back on the table. We'll break it down for you. But before we do that, go ahead and do us a favor by leaving a like on the video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting the bell icon so you never miss an upload from us. And with that being said, let's get straight into the video. The appeal. Let's dive right into the latest development. A Florida appeals court ruled Wednesday that YNW Melly could face the death penalty if convicted in his upcoming murder trial, overturning a judge's decision that prosecutors forfeited the right to seek capital punishment. With a trial looming this past summer, Judge Andrew Siegel ruled that prosecutors couldn't seek the death penalty because they had failed to give Melly and his attorneys proper notice that they planned to do so, violating strict state rules. But in a ruling on Wednesday, Florida's District Court of Appeal ruled the judge's decision was incorrect, since prosecutors gave notice that they might seek the death penalty when they first charged Melly in 2019. They had complied with state rules. Notice is notice, the court wrote in its opinion. The ruling means that Melly could be sentenced to death if convicted in his upcoming trial, but that likely won't take place until the Florida Supreme Court rules on the case, because Wednesday's ruling certified the issue as one of great public importance that should be decided by the state high court. Yep, that means that there is even more waiting to be done with this trial, making you wonder if anything is ever going to get done with him. In a statement to Billboard, Melly's attorney, Philip R. Horowitz, said he and his client were disappointed in the ruling, but look forward to our opportunity to argue our position before the justices. He will get that opportunity, but what their ruling will be is anyone's guess at this point. As many people know, the Supreme Court has made some controversial rulings in recent months, and while this case pales in comparison to those, that doesn't mean their ruling will be any less important. But what this does do is further complicate a case that continues to trip over its own feet in terms of getting things going. False starts. A trial had previously been scheduled for April, but was called off at the last minute, prompting Melly's attorney to file a so-called speedy trial demand that would require the case to start within 60 days. Another trial was then set for July, but the case was again delayed over the current dispute about the death penalty. A first-degree murder defendant in Florida would typically face the possibility of execution if convicted, but Melly's attorney argued in April that the state had failed to comply with strict laws on how they must warn defendants that they'll seek the death penalty. Florida requires prosecutors to give notice 45 days after arraignment if they plan to seek capital punishment. In Melly's case, the state attorney filed such notice when they originally indicted the rapper in 2019, but failed to do so when a so-called superseding incident was handed down earlier this year. In July, Judge Siegel sided with Melly's attorney and said prosecutors had forfeited the chance to seek death. But after prosecutors argued that the ruling was clearly incorrect, Judge Siegel acknowledged that his ruling addressed a novel legal question and halted the case until a state appeals court could rule on it. On Wednesday, the District Court of Appeal did so and sided decisively with prosecutors. We find that the state complied with its statutory obligations when it filed its notice of intent to seek the death penalty within 45 days of the arraignment, Judge Spencer D. Levine wrote for the appeals court. The fact that the state filed a superseding indictment requiring a second arraignment does not vitiate the already filed and timely notice of intent. Notice is notice. The ruling said that rules were designed to give defendants a fair chance to prepare for a death penalty argument, and that prosecutors had lived up to that requirement with their original notice. Clearly, in the present case, the defendant was noticed and apprised of the state seeking the death penalty in 2019. Judge Levine wrote, "The defendant has had nearly 3 years to start the preparation of his defense to the state seeking the death penalty, and the record contains no evidence that the defendant was prejudiced in any way." So that seems to be a pretty definitive state. And yet, as noted, it's going to the Supreme Court now. It does make sense that it would go to them due to the nature of the punishment presented. The death penalty is a serious matter, and not something that everyone agrees on. Given that, it needs to be carefully handled in the states that allow it, else there will be a lot of problems. But at this point, you might be thinking, why is a young rapper like YNW Melly getting all these courts worked up? That's because his crime is worthy of the death penalty in many people's minds. due to the heinous actions he committed. First-degree murder. October 26th of 2018 was the date when all of this madness began, and if you asked anyone on that day, they wouldn't have predicted all that would come to happen. YNW Melly went to the hospital to get help for two of his friends, or at least that's what he claimed at the time, but that was the first of many lies to come. Rather, he had his friend Cortland Henry go to the hospital to get help for his two friends Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr. According to Cortland, when he reported the incident, him and his friends were driving out in the town in the early parts of the morning after a recording session when they were caught in a drive-by. By his account, a car pulled up to the passenger side of the car and unloaded on them. A tragic tale, one that ended in reality with Williams and Thomas Jr. dying while Cortland was unharmed. As investigators examined the car, they realized that certain things didn't line up as they should. For example, the car seemed to be relatively undamaged outside of only 8 holes, which wouldn't line up with a drive-by if they were unloaded upon by multiple people. Those small details very much add up, not to mention the way his friends were hit and killed didn't line up with a drive-by story either. Investigators thoroughly examined the scene and found evidence that the drive-by was indeed an inside job that YNW Melly was a part of. Usually bullet shells fly either backwards or to the side of the firearm, not in front of it. Even in close proximity, it wouldn't have ended up as it was in the car. In this case, the left rear side of the car, which is the opposite side of where the holes were located. So they dug deeper into the events of that night, and they eventually found video evidence that showed Cortland, Williams, Thomas Jr., and YNW Melly getting into the car that the others would be hurt in, and in the back left seat of the car where the casings were found was none other than YNW Melly. When they later asked Melly why he didn't come to the hospital with Cortland, he claimed that he needed to clear his head and used another car to get away from the spot of the attack. Yet another lie, and it wouldn't be his last. What police deduced was that all 4 did indeed get into the car, but then YNW Melly went and took out Williams and Thomas Jr. Then, to help sell the lie, the two went and drove the car around to help create a story for themselves via the drive-by scenario, and then they separated, so one could be clear, while the other makes a dramatic story about getting help at the hospital. After these key details were discovered, both Melly and Cortland were arrested for the deaths of the two, and the long walk towards punishment began, one that unfortunately keeps getting longer and longer. But hopefully now you can see why this is getting such consideration. He killed multiple people and then tried to hide that he did it. What's more, he clearly planned to do it ahead of time, which makes all of these events premeditated. An even more heinous act. To kill people you used to call friends in cold blood is a terrible crime, and so you can see why these prosecutors are going for the maximum possible punishment here. Whether they get it or not is up for debate, but they're definitely trying. And YNW Melly has been trying to get out of his position ever since, including apparently with a prison break. YNW Melly was accused not too long ago of teaming up with one of his lawyers to try and plan an escape from prison. Yes, really, not only was he trying to escape from prison, he got one of his lawyers to apparently try and help him. That's bad. A Florida sheriff's office made the accusation during a court hearing on September 27th. YNW Melly has remained behind bars in Broward County, Florida for 3 years following his arrest. The Broward County Sheriff's General Counsel's office shared a statement with Complex which details the evidence they found to back up their accusation. On April 11th, 2022, Broward Sheriff's Office received a confidential tip regarding inmates Nicholas Lewis and Jamel Demons, both housed in the same unit at the main jail, planning an escape from jail by having Demons' attorney bring in 2 handcuff keys to aid in the escape. Additional information provided by the source was that Lewis had a shank and drugs. The statement reads, "It's not too hard to see how the plan could have gone. They would have used the handcuff keys in an advantageous position, likely when they were alone with only a guard nearby, and could have used the layout of the prison to theoretically get out. The guard would have been taken care of by the shank, and if they timed it right, they could have gotten out before too much of the ruckus was made. The lawyer also could have been part of their getaway. Obviously, the prison escape didn't happen, and thank goodness. But the fact that it could have needs to be what we think about here. YNW Melly's mother was one who denied the claims, but she's also one who has said multiple times that her boy was coming home, and yet it didn't and hasn't happened. She also thinks the system is trying to do everything it can to screw over her son, so take her words with a grain of salt. The fate of YNW Melly. The fate of the rapper is still to be determined, as his trial is not complete, but we do know that it's going to happen. The trial, we mean. Plus, the prosecutors are confident that things are going to go their way, as they feel they have the evidence to, at the very least, lock up Melly for good, if not serve the death penalty. There's still a lot that can happen between then and now, but things are not looking good for him. And there you go, everyone, a look at what's going on with YNW Melly and whether he'll be facing the death penalty soon enough. Do you think that there's going to be a major backlash if that happens? Do you feel he deserves this punishment based on what he did? What other developments will this case have? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.